All right, so you want to know all about early phase clinical trials, especially that crucial part where researchers are bringing in the first human participants, right?
Yeah.
You want the nitty-gritty, how they do it ethically and effectively without all the extra stuff.
Well, you've come to the right place.
That's what the deep dive is all about. We've gone through all the information out there to bring you exactly that.
Today, we're diving deep into patient recruitment, informed consent, and really the whole ethical foundation of these very first tests of new drugs in humans.
Absolutely. And to do that, we're looking at transcripts and even some real-world examples.
We want to give you a crystal clear picture of the practical challenges and, of course, the critical safeguards that are built into these early phase trials.
These first tests in humans are so important.
They are.
They're the first time a drug's actually used in people.
Right.
So we need to learn how the drug acts in the body and at the same time make sure we are protecting the people who have volunteered for this research.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's jump right into the first big question. How do researchers even find the right people for these early studies?
Yeah, that's the first hurdle, and it's a big one.
It is.
One of the first things researchers have to figure out, and we see this in our sources, is whether they need healthy volunteers or patient volunteers.
Right, that's a key distinction.
And a lot of it comes down to the type of drug they're testing.
Makes sense. We were looking through the transcript from Season 4 Clinical Trials Phase IN2 Deep Research Source, text.t.pdf, and it pointed out that for a lot of those non-oncology drugs, especially those small molecule drugs, they really seem to prefer starting with healthy volunteers. Why is that?
Well, when you think about it, if you're testing a new drug in people for the first time and you want to understand its safety and how it moves through the body, using healthy volunteers can really make that picture a lot clearer because, they don't have an underlying illness. So any side effects that you observe are more likely to be directly because of the drug itself. And how the drug moves through their body, that whole process isn't complicated by a disease that they have.
So it's about getting that clean signal.
Exactly.
It's like, I don't know, if you were testing a brand new engine, you'd probably start by putting it in a regular car first, just to see how it runs.
Exactly, yeah. You wouldn't stick it straight into a race car or something.
You'd want that basic understanding. Now, the same source mentions that when it comes to oncology drugs, things often change.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to shift towards using patients as volunteers. Why is that?
Well, you have to consider the ethics of it.
Yeah.
Giving a drug that could be quite toxic, like some of these powerful oncology drugs, to a healthy person who wouldn't get any direct benefit from it, that raises some serious ethical concerns.
Definitely.
So in those cases, phase 1 trials usually enroll patients who already have the disease, often those who've exhausted all the standard treatment options.
Right.
And this way, there's at least a chance, even if it's a small chance, that they might actually benefit from this experimental therapy. Plus, researchers can start to see if the drug is having any impact on the tumor itself.
It makes sense. It's about finding that balance. And, the discussion about the failed BIA 1010-2474 trial, that really highlighted this shift in thinking.
Definitely.
Regulatory agencies are becoming much more cautious, even advocating for patient volunteers as the first choice in some of these high-risk first-in-human trials.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes that we need to be incredibly thoughtful about the risks and the potential benefits for everyone involved.
Right, because the potential for harm to healthy volunteers with certain classes of drugs, it's just too great.
It is.
And I think this evolution really shows that the more experience we gain and the better we understand those risks, the more our approach to these early trials needs to adapt.
It has to adapt. So let's say the researchers have decided, okay, we need healthy volunteers, or okay, we need patients. What are some of the practical challenges they run into when they actually try to get people to sign up for these phase 1 trials?
Finding those willing participants.
Yeah, getting people enrolled.
We came across this great point in clinical trials, a practical guide to design, analysis, and reporting, and it really stuck with me.
Yeah.
Choosing the right research centers is absolutely crucial for successful recruitment.
That makes sense.
If those centers aren't in areas where you can find the right types of patients, or if the research question just isn't a top priority for the doctors at those centers, well then it's going to be really hard to find enough participants.
It's like trying to find like a rare antique book
Okay, yeah.
in a bookstore that specializes in, I don't know, comic books or something like that.
Exactly. You're not going to find what you need there.
You need to go to the right place. The same source also talks about financial incentives, and it suggests that if this study is tackling a problem that's really important to patients and their doctors, then those incentives might not even be necessary. Why is that?
Well, think about it. If the research offers a real, tangible hope for tackling a serious health problem,
Yeah,
both the patients and their doctors are going to be highly motivated to participate. The potential for a positive outcome is going to be a much stronger motivator than any financial reward.
it's about that personal stake. It's interesting, though, because the same text also says that commercially funded projects sometimes see higher recruitment rates.
Hmm,
I wonder if that could be because commercially funded trials often have more resources available for things like outreach
yeah,
and coordinating the trial,
that's a good point.
making it easier to connect with potential participants.
It's definitely possible. More funding could absolutely mean they're able to make more effort in finding and reaching out to those who might be eligible.
It's all about reaching the right people. Now, regardless of how those participants are found or who's funding the research, there's one ethical requirement that's always paramount: informed consent.
Absolutely.
Informed consent is the cornerstone of ethical clinical trials, especially in these early phases where the potential risks might not be fully understood yet.
That's right.
It's about protecting the rights and the well-being of those people who are bravely volunteering to be the first to receive this new drug.
That's exactly right.
Now, these phase 1 trials are tricky because this drug is brand new to humans.
Uh-huh.
The risks might not be completely clear, so that puts a big ethical responsibility on the researchers to do their due diligence, to identify and explain those potential risks to anyone who's thinking about participating.
Absolutely. And the Clinical Trials Handbook actually lays out 5 key areas that researchers need to consider when they're describing those potential harms.
Oh, that's interesting. What are those 5 things?
They have to think about the magnitude of the potential harm. In other words, how serious could the side effects be? Okay. Then there's the probability of those harms actually happening. How likely are they? They also need to consider how invasive the intervention is.
Okay.
Are we just talking about a simple blood draw, or is it a more involved procedure?
Yeah?
Then they have to think about the timing of any potential harm. Could it happen immediately? Are we talking short term, or are there potential long-term consequences?
Right.
And finally, and this is so important, they have to think about equity issues.
Yeah.
Are they asking certain groups of people, maybe those who are already vulnerable in some way, to take on a larger share of the risk?
That's such a crucial point about fairness and protecting those who might be more susceptible to harm.
Absolutely.
And it's fascinating that the handbook also points out that even placebo conditions need to be considered for potential harm. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. So a placebo itself is inactive, right?
Yeah.
But let's say you have a study looking at a new drug for high blood pressure.
Hmm?
Now, if a participant is randomly assigned to the placebo group, that means their high blood pressure isn't actually being treated.
Right.
And that lack of active treatment could have some negative health consequences for them. The Clinical Trials Handbook really emphasizes this, and it raises some complex ethical questions about how we design these trials.
It does. It's about ensuring the participants understand the full picture when they're giving their consent.
Absolutely.
So all of this, these individual ethical considerations, it's all part of a bigger system, right?
Yes,
A regulatory framework that's designed to make sure research is done responsibly.
that's right.
And while our sources don't give us specific FDA regulation numbers about informed consent in this exact context,
Right.
the principles we're talking about here, they're absolutely central to the FDA's mission of protecting people who participate in research.
Absolutely. And the FDA isn't alone in this.
It's not.
We also have the ICH guidelines.
The International Council for Harmonization.
Yes, and specifically the merged ACH-M series, which lays out an international standard for ethical conduct in clinical trials.
So it goes beyond just the U.S.
It does.
It's a global effort to make sure these trials are done ethically.
Exactly, and these guidelines really reinforce the idea that informed consent has to be given freely and based on a real understanding of what the study is about.
Okay, so ethical conduct in these early phase trials, it goes beyond just that initial informed consent form, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
What are some of the ethical things they need to be thinking about once the trial is actually running?
Yeah, so the Clinical Trials Handbook talks about this idea of minimal risk.
Minimal risk, okay.
And it's defined as basically Any potential harm from the research should be no more likely and no worse than what someone might experience just going about their normal daily life,
Okay,
or during a routine physical or psychological exam.
got it.
But early phase trials, especially when you're dealing with a completely new drug, the risks could be greater than that minimal level. So researchers constantly have to be weighing whether the potential benefits of the research outweigh those potential risks.
So that balance between potential harm and potential benefit, that seems to be a core theme throughout the ethical design of these trials.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The handbook is very clear on that. The research questions have to be chosen very carefully, weighing the potential harm against the potential benefits, and any risks to participants must be minimized as much as possible. At the same time, they should be doing everything they can to maximize any potential benefits to those participants. It really underscores the importance of ethics throughout the whole trial.
Absolutely. It's a constant consideration. Now, we've talked about vulnerable populations,
Yes.
and I think it's worth reiterating that whenever researchers are thinking about involving those groups in early phase trials, they need to be extra careful,
Yes, definitely.
extra scrutiny, extra safeguards, because those individuals could be more susceptible to harm.
Exactly.
Now, our sources also highlight the critical role of ethics boards in this whole process,
Yes.
often called institutional review boards, or IRBs.
Right. And they're responsible for reviewing and approving all those clinical trial protocols.
They have to make sure it's ethical.
Yes. And in the Season 4 clinical trials phase, IN2 Deep Research Source TXT.pdf, it actually mentions that these boards can ask researchers to make changes to their study plans
Oh, wow.
if they're concerned about safety or any ethical aspects of the research. So it's a very important layer of protection for those who participate in these trials.
Yeah, that independent oversight is so crucial.
Mm.
Now, we wanted to see if our sources gave any specific real-world examples of problems that have come up,
Mm.
like challenges in recruiting patients or ethical dilemmas that have actually happened in these early phase trials. Did we find any concrete cases?
Well, the materials we looked at, they do a great job of laying out the principles and the guidelines,
Yeah.
but they don't really dive into specific case studies
Okay.
that show those recruitment problems or ethical challenges playing out in a phase 1 trial. A lot of the discussion about those real-world events tends to focus more on later stage trials or even findings from the preclinical stage.
I see.
But, that whole discussion about the BIA 102474 trial, that's a powerful reminder of the serious risks involved in those first-in-human studies,
It is.
especially with certain types of drugs, and it really highlights the importance of ethical considerations in how we design and conduct those studies.
It emphasizes how much we need to be thinking about those things.
Hmm.
So just because these particular sources don't give us those specific case studies, it doesn't mean these issues don't happen.
Exactly.
It's just that the material we were looking at had a different focus. All right, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about how all of this fits into the bigger regulatory landscape.
Okay.
We've talked about the FDA and the ICH.
Uh-huh.
Could you go into more detail about their specific roles in overseeing these early phase trials?
Sure. So in the U.S., the FDA is the main regulatory body that oversees clinical research.
They're the ones who have to give the green light.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a whole process for this called the Investigational New Drug Application, or IND process.
Right.
We saw this mentioned in the Season 3 Preclinical Development and IND Enabling Transcripts.pdf, and also in Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 312. Basically, anyone who wants to do clinical trials with a new drug in the U.S. has to submit an IND to the FDA.
So it's like an application package.
Exactly. And it includes all sorts of information about the preclinical testing they've already done, the design of the clinical trial they're proposing, and the qualifications of the researchers who are going to be running this study.
It's like showing their homework.
Exactly. And the FDA carefully reviews all of this to make sure it's safe to move ahead with testing in humans.
And they don't just approve the IND and then wash their hands of it, right?
No, not at all. The FDA's involvement continues throughout the entire clinical trial.
Okay.
CFR Title 21 Part 312 lays this out pretty clearly. The sponsors of the trial have this ongoing responsibility to monitor what's happening in the study and to make sure everything is being done according to the plan that was approved, following all the regulations and ethical guidelines.
Got it.
And if they find out that an investigator isn't complying with those requirements, they have to take action.
Like step in and fix things.
Exactly. They might have to ensure compliance or even remove that investigator from the study altogether.
Wow.
And they're required to report that to the FDA.
So there's a lot of accountability built in.
There is. It really highlights how important it is to maintain ethical and scientific rigor throughout the entire trial.
It does. Now, what about the International Council for Harmonization, or ICH?
Right, the ICH.
How do their guidelines contribute to the ethical conduct of these early trials?
Well, the ICH guidelines, which we see in the merged ICH-M series, they're all about creating a harmonized approach to the scientific and ethical standards for clinical trials globally.
So it's about consistency across different countries.
Exactly. Now, FDA regulations are law in the U.S., but the ICH guidelines, they represent a consensus among regulatory authorities from the U.S., Europe, Japan, and other parts of the world.
Okay.
So by following these guidelines, researchers can be more confident that their clinical trial data will be accepted by regulatory agencies in different countries.
That's huge for global drug development.
It is. And these guidelines cover a really wide range of topics, including detailed principles of good clinical practice.
Good clinical practice.
Yes, and that covers all sorts of ethical considerations for how trials should be designed, conducted, recorded, and reported.
So to wrap things up, we've really covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've got a much clearer picture now of what it takes to find the right participants for those early phase drug tests,
Hopefully.
and why it's so important to make sure those volunteers truly understand what they're signing up for with informed consent.
Absolutely.
And we've talked about the ethical principles that are guiding this whole process, all under the watchful eye of regulators like the FDA.
That's right.
And those global standards that are being promoted by the ICH.
It's a complex system, but it's all designed to ensure that these trials are done safely and ethically.
It is. These early phase clinical trials, they're really the first step on the road to potentially life-saving therapies for people who desperately need them.
They are.
So understanding the ethics behind them, how recruitment works, and the regulatory context is essential for anyone who's involved in this world of medical innovation.
It is.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder as you go about your day.
Okay.
We have this incredible need for new medical treatments,
We do.
often for really serious, life-threatening conditions. But at the same time, we have these strict ethical standards that have to be upheld throughout the development of those treatments. Think about that balance, that tension between the urgent need for those new therapies and the absolute necessity of doing things the right way ethically. How does that influence your perspective on medical breakthroughs? How do those breakthroughs actually happen?
It's a really important question to consider.
It is, and it's a complex one. And I hope this deep dive has given you some new insights to consider.
Me too.
Thanks for joining us today. Keep those questions coming.
Absolutely. Keep learning.